In the middle of a field, officers Judith and Reinert find the dead body of Live. Reinert ends up throwing up because he dated Live during their school days. The cops call the local funeral agency, which happens to be owned by Live's brother Odd and her father Arvid. The men have to stay professional while picking up the body, but it's clear they're devastated inside. During the autopsy, a doctor cuts Live's chest and is shocked to see the wound bleed. Suddenly, Live has a seizure before she removes the knife from her chest as she screams. Later, Live wakes up at the hospital with Odd by her side, but the last thing she remembers is taking a walk 4 days ago. Dr. Sver confirms she's alive and healthy, theorizing her heart stopped because of hypothermia. Arvid calls Odd to check on the situation and asks if Live is any different now, but Odd doesn't catch on the hidden meaning behind the question. Sver tells Live the test results are fine and she can leave today, so Live goes to get a snack. Judith and Reiner show up to apologize for the confusion and warn her that the press wants to make a big story out of this. When the siblings go home, Arvid refuses to see his daughter, and Odd thinks he's just feeling guilty because he couldn't tell Liv was alive. However, Arvid looks scared and keeps staring at a bottle of chloroform. While putting her things away, Liv notices her necklace is missing, but Odd swears he didn't find it on her body. She also eats some chocolate, but surprisingly hates the taste. Later during dinner, Arvid lights a candle and studies Liv's reaction. Noticing, she freezes for a second. This makes him nervous, so he storms out of the room. Liv is upset by her dad's attitude and decides to go for a walk to clear her thoughts. On her way out, she realizes she can still hear Odd talking to his wife Rose, even though they're upstairs. It seems they both think she's acting strange. Getting more upset now, Liv starts running, gaining impressive speed without even breaking a sweat. In just a few minutes, she reaches the field near the barn where they found her body and easily finds the spot because grass stays away from it. When she touches the ground, memories come back to her. Someone caught her from behind and injected something in her neck before taking her necklace. She tried running away, but she barely ran for a few seconds before passing out. Liv immediately runs to the police station and tells Reinert that she was attacked, but Reinert doesn't believe her because the doctors found no injuries. At home, Arvid brings out an old tape. His wife's voice explains that if he's listening to this, she's dead for real this time, and asks Arvid to take care of their children. She also asks him to keep an eye on Liv because the mother's darkness may be spreading to her. When Liv comes home, Arvid starts interrogating her, but he notices her eyes changing and gets scared, so he leaves. Afterward, Liv rants to Odd about the situation, not understanding who would want her dead and why the killer abandoned her body in the field, not to mention her dad's strange behavior lately. Odd says he wishes there was a serial killer on the loose to get more clients since nobody dies in their little town. Moments later, Arvid calls Liv to his office, and after some struggle, he manages to knock her out with chloroform as he apologizes. Then he drags the body downstairs and Odd hears a noise, but when he takes a look, he only sees his dad. Arvid gives him some work excuse about checking on the crematorium and leaves. When Liv wakes up, she finds herself inside a casket. She starts screaming and pushing, but Arvid ignores her. He pushes the casket into the crematorium and turns on the flames, thinking he's doing the right thing. The heat makes Liv freak out, and she finally manages to break the wood to get out of the casket. Arvid hears the noise and looks through the little window, noticing his daughter is trying to escape. He pulls a lever to bring down a thick wall that seals the exit hole. Liv manages to put her fingers under it before it fully closes and uses outstanding strength to lift it again so she can crawl out. After noticing she somehow isn't burnt, Liv is shocked to see her father is behind this. Arvid apologizes again as he explains he did this for Liv's own sake. He also mentions he couldn't help his wife, who suffered through the same thing. As he comes closer to grab her, he says he has proof at home, and Liv screams. Few hours later, Odd receives a call informing him Arvid is dead. He goes to Liv's room to give her the bad news, and she hugs him while hiding her blood-stained hands. A flashback shows that Liv pushed her dad out of fear and accidentally threw him downstairs. But even though it was an accident, the guilt still haunts her. Soon, Judith and Reinhard arrive at the scene of the crime. Judith thinks it's a simple case of an old man tripping and falling, but Reiner points out it's suspicious the same family had 2 mysterious deaths in a week. Odd also comes to pick up the body, and seeing his dead father makes him snap at the cops. On his way to the morgue, Odd stops at a gas station to use the bathroom and ends up screaming into the paper towels. After dropping the body at the morgue, Odd goes to the funeral agency and sits in the main office as he tries to accept the fact this is all his now. In the drawer, he finds a bunch of envelopes from the bank, so he goes to see the family's financial advisor. It turns out Arvid had a lot of debt, which will now be in Odd's name. He has 2 weeks to pay or the family will lose the house because of the mortgage. When Odd returns to the office, he discovers some kids painted dirty graffiti on the window. He immediately starts cleaning and is interrupted by Martin, who tells him he can get more clients if he offers a discount and leaves a brochure promoting his sales classes. At home, Liv looks around his father's place and finds the tapes. She listens to her mother describing some darkness inside her and how she couldn't stop it from taking over her, not to mention her request to Arvid to do something if Liv ever goes through the same thing. Furious, Liv throws the tape on the ground. Rose hears the noise and tries to offer her support, but Liv hides the tape and says she'll go to work anyway because she needs a distraction. Liv is a nurse at a retirement home, and when she has to take a blood sample from an old lady, she is distracted by the pulse under the wrinkly skin as if it was hypnotizing her. When the blood comes out, Liv gets distracted again, and her eyes change color. The syringe falls from her hand and she almost passes out. But her co-worker Mathieu catches her just in time. Liv rushes to the bathroom and nervously washes her hands, but she can't wash off the blood stain on her uniform. She tries sucking it off, and her eyes change color again as she starts to enjoy it. Looking at herself in the mirror makes her realize the darkness her mother mentioned means becoming a vampire. She starts sucking the blood stain again, but it's interrupted when Rose comes to check on her. Liv tells her she just felt dizzy, and now she's doing better. But Rose thinks Lev isn't okay because of the grief and sends her home. At the morgue, the forensic doctors open Arvid's chest and are shocked by what they find. They immediately call Judith and Reinert to tell them Arvid's ribs are broken, which means someone pushed him. Now Reinert believes Liv's story and thinks someone is going after the whole family. Meanwhile, Liv returns to the field to search for clues but doesn't find anything. At that moment, she's found by Reinert, who informs her he'll start a formal investigation. Liv plays along but can't stop staring at the veins in his neck. She leans to try to bite him, and Reinert thinks she wants to kiss him, so leans in as well, making her snap out of it and pull back. Afterwards, she goes to see Sverre and tells him she's been feeling dizzy, so he takes a blood sample to run some tests. Later at dinner, Rose offers a toast in Arvid's name. Odd shares that he met with their financial advisor, but doesn't say anything about the debt. While he talks, Liv keeps getting distracted by his chewing and suddenly snaps, yelling and throwing her fork. Embarrassed by her outburst, she runs to hide in her room and notices that her eyes change color again. Desperate for answers, Liv checks the other tapes and discovers her mother would lose her mind when the kids cried too much. The woman also kept saying she needed at least a little sip of blood. In the middle of the night, Liv sneaks out of the house and goes to the retirement home. She grabs a syringe and takes a blood sample from her patient, telling her that it's just some routine tests. After the old lady falls asleep again, Liv cleans the puncture wound and licks her finger, once again confirming she likes the taste. This causes her to grab the blood bag and start drinking, but looking at herself in the window makes her feel guilty again. When Liv is about to leave, the old lady goes into cardiac arrest. Liv tries to give her CPR, but it's too late. The woman is dead. She presses the emergency button and hides under the bed before Mathieu comes in. He also tries CPR and quickly gives up, so he offers a prayer for the old lady before leaving. As soon as he's gone, Liv tries to escape only to discover Mathieu locked the door, and the windows are always locked for security reasons. The next morning, Rose comforts Odd, who has to prepare his own father's body for the funeral. He's about to confess the debt, but he's interrupted by a call asking him to pick up the old lady from the retirement home. Odd can't help being happy that someone who isn't family died because it means business. Meanwhile, Reinert is checking all the security cameras in town. Judith still thinks the idea of a serial killer in their little village is ridiculous and reminds Reinert sometimes people just die from a heart attack. Since Reinert insists, Judith shares the story of how she used to be obsessed with the case too. She pushed the subjects very hard with her interrogations, and now thinks it was all this stress that caused Liv's mother to self-delete, so this is why she doesn't want to announce there's a murderer unless there's more definitive evidence. Judith also thinks Reinert is obsessed with the case because he likes Liv and wants to impress her, not because of law-related reasons. Soon, Odd and Mathieu enter the dead lady's room to move the body, so Liv has to hide under the bed again. Odd bends over to pick up a fallen bottle, but thankfully he doesn't see his sister. He also lowers the bed, and Liv worries the machinery may crush her. However, it doesn't go that low. After the men are gone, Liv tries to leave and is blocked by the patient's sons. She has to pretend she was working and offers her condolences before finally fleeing. When she gets home, she throws the rest of the blood in the sink. In the afternoon, Odd begins preparing the funeral and finds a note from Arvid saying he wanted a casket that was damaged and couldn't be sold. Odd wants Liv to prepare a eulogy, and at first she refuses, but she changes her mind when she sees the stress her brother's under. At that moment, Odd notices Liv's eyes have flecks of a different color, and she immediately denies it. But when she goes to the bathroom, she confirms it's true. Afterwards, she goes for a walk to clear her thoughts and is found by Sverre, who wants to run more tests. However, Liv says she feels just fine now. When she returns home, she tries to write the eulogy, but keeps getting distracted by the blood bag in the trash can. She closes the door to avoid seeing it, but then a fly comes in and the buzzing sound hurts her enhanced ears. Feeling like she's going crazy, Liv follows a different noise outside and discovers it's the neighbor's lawnmower, which she kicks to turn it off. The machine's owner happens to be Martin, who calls her out on her attitude and makes her mood worse. At the same time, Reinhard is on a date with Judith's niece, who was sent by Judith herself to distract him away from Liv. While they drive around town, Reinhard suddenly stops the car when he sees a fight nearby. It turns out to be Liv, who is furiously beating Martin up on the ground. The man begs for mercy, and Liv only stops for a second before she starts punching him again. Reinhard grabs Liv from behind, only to be thrown across the garden. His date comes to check on him while Liv finally realizes she's going crazy, so she runs away. Later at the police station, Reinhard adds pictures of his bruises as part of the evidence in the family's case. He tries calling Liv, but she won't pick up. Judith thinks he's being paranoid again. However, Reinhard remembers that Arvid had 7 cracked ribs and starts wondering if Liv's mysterious new strength did it. At home, Liv continues to listen to the recordings and learns her mother had been worried about her need for blood, plus the probability of passing the darkness to her daughter. Suddenly, the lights start flickering, and Liv rushes to the bathroom to throw up blood before screaming. Then she begins to sweat and tremble, showing the symptoms of an addict going through withdrawal. She starts having hallucinations and ends up going to the sink to lick any traces of blood. Since it's not enough, she searches for the blood bag in the trash and drinks the remaining drops. It's still not much, but it helps her calm down. When Odd comes to pick her up for the funeral, Liv realizes she's been inside for a couple of days. Odd thinks it's a natural part of grief and doesn't suspect anything. At the funeral, Odd gets angry because the flower company made a spelling mistake on the ribbon, but forces himself to calm down before people arrive. Reinhard tries to share his conclusions with Judith, who tells him he must wait until the funeral is done. Sverre also tells Liv that they need to talk later. During the ceremony, Liv gets distracted, and she has to be called multiple times to give the eulogy. She tries to read what she wrote, but she starts feeling dizzy and keeps hearing her mother saying, "I need blood." Not being able to take it anymore, Liv runs away and Reinhard follows her while Odd finishes reading what she wrote. In the middle of the night, Liv wakes up in the forest and finds dozens of missed calls from Reinhard and her brother. Liv decides to visit Reinhard, and when she comes inside, the lights hurt her eyes. Reinhard hugs her to comfort her, and Liv can hear his heartbeat very loudly. The next morning, Liv wakes up in bed, covered in blood next to a dead Reinhard. After covering him with the sheets, she rushes to wash all the blood from her mouth and leaves. On her way home, Judith sees her and notices she's jumpy. She only wants to know if Liv has seen Reinhard because he hasn't come to work, but Liv pretends she doesn't know anything. Meanwhile, Odd follows Martin's advice and offers a discount to the old lady's sons to try to sell an expensive casket, but it doesn't work. The sons get even more annoyed when Odd makes a dark joke, so they buy the cheapest model and refuse any decorations, meaning this job won't give Odd much money. When Liv comes to the office, she wants to confess what's happening to her, but Odd talks first and finally admits they'll lose the house soon. Liv stares at the big casket the clients bought and gets an idea. At that moment, Rose comes by to mention that the bank called, so Odd tries to come up with a lie while Liv steals some gear. On her way out, Liv notices Judith overseeing a car crash in the streets. Sverre also passes by and reminds Liv she must go to his office later because they need to talk. At the same time, Judith looks at the books that fell from the crash van and discovers happy powder hidden in the covers. Liv returns to Reinhard's house and cleans all the blood from the floor before putting the body in a bag. Reinhard's phone keeps getting calls from Judith, so Liv unlocks it using his face. Pretending to be Reinhard, she texts Judith saying he's sick and won't go to work today. A skeptical Judith goes to check on him anyway, and since nobody opens the door, she checks the garage and finds the car there. Liv uses the funeral gear to leave with the body before Judith can see her, and in her hurry, she doesn't notice a bloodstain on the wall. Moments later, Judith sees Liv crossing the bridge and asks about the package she's carrying, so Liv pretends it's just some stuff she's bringing from the family's storage unit. When Liv makes it to the funeral house, she unwraps Reinhard and notices the bite mark on his neck. She decides to cover his head with plastic and tape to avoid any leaking. Then she pushes Reinhard into the old lady's casket, hiding him under the sheets. When Odd hears a noise, he comes to check, and Liv pretends she patted the casket up a little so it wouldn't look so empty, which Odd considers a good idea. Then Liv hugs Odd to keep him distracted and convinces him to put the lid on the casket so it can be sent to the crematory. Afterward, Odd attends Martin's business class. When Moran starts asking questions to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the funeral home, Odd snaps and yells that nobody dies here before storming out of the classroom. Meanwhile, Liv goes to see Sverre, who takes a new blood sample. He asks Liv how she's feeling and reminds her he must respect confidentiality, so he offers an ear for her problems. However, Live says she's fine and leaves. That night, Odd considers telling Rose about the debt, but he keeps it to himself when Rose drops big news she's pregnant. Odd is delighted, but when Liv hears this from behind the door, she feels she shouldn't bother the couple with her issues and retires to her room. She continues listening to the tapes and cries when she hears her mother taking care of a baby Live. The next morning, Odd brings Live breakfast and tells her about the baby. He also explains that using the baby excuse, he convinced the old lady's sons to buy a full funeral, so the casket isn't going to be cremated yet. Instead, it'll be open for the ceremony. Later, Liv runs to the church, but the front door is locked, and Odd is already inside getting things ready. She manages to sneak in using a window and hides behind some furniture until Odd leaves the room. At that moment, Reinert's body rises, and Live watches in shock how he jumps out of the casket to run out of the church. While she chases after him, Odd arrives with the old lady's family and friends. The body in the casket is in a terrible state after Reinert pushed it around, so the sons refuse to pay for the service. In the woods, Live finds Reinert, who tries to attack her. She hits him a few times to get him off, and Reinert tries to fight back, so Live has to keep punching him. Eventually, Reinert overpowers her and pushes her against some logs with such strength that she collapses. Then Liv finds a rock and hits Reinert with it to knock him out. At the police station, Judith is still worried about Reinert and checks his office, only to find a crumpled picture of Live in the trash. Suddenly, Liv arrives and says she found Reinert in the woods with no clothes except for a bag over his head. She claims he attacked her out of nowhere, and she knocked him out in self-defense. One of the cops thinks Live caught him in the middle of a naughty game, but Judith is suspicious and says they'll learn the truth when Reinert wakes up. Worried about what Reinert may say, Live goes to his hospital room and suffocates him to death with a pillow. At that moment, Sverre comes in, but he doesn't look surprised and tells Liv to wait a second. Suddenly, Reinert wakes up screaming, so Sverre tells Liv to keep guard outside while he takes a sample of his own blood and injects it into Reinert to calm him down. Meanwhile, Odd goes to the bank to tell his financial advisor that he's going to be a father, but this doesn't get him a full extension. However, he does get a small offer if he makes a partial payment of $30,000, then the rest of the debt can get the extension he wants. On his way home, Odd freaks out and throws a bunch of chairs into a pool to deal with his frustration. While he wonders what to do with his life, Rose comes looking for him to announce they have a client. It's Martin, who claims his cousin died in Sweden, but the family wants to bury him here in his homeland. Odd explains that death passports and all the international paperwork are very expensive, so he dares to ask for $30,000. To his surprise, Martin immediately agrees. Minutes later, Reinert wakes up feeling better. At that moment, Judith arrives to interrogate him, but Sverre interrupts her to explain Reinert had a psychotic episode, so he doesn't remember anything. He also says Reinert can go home now. A worried Liv doesn't think this is a good idea, but Sverre tells her they'll talk later in private. In the evening, Sverre visits Liv and listens to the tapes, revealing he told her mother to make them. It turns out Liv's mom tried to quit blood, but she went crazy, so Arvid took her to see Sverre. He promised to expose her. In fact, he tried to help her deal with her condition while studying her blood. His goal had been to find the key that made vampires heal quickly and stay young forever, to use it for medicine. However, before he could discover anything, Liv's mother self-deleted. She always knew her daughter was the same, but didn't say anything because she wanted her to have a normal life for as long as possible. Sverre used his hypothermia lie to protect Liv, but now he thinks they must kill Reinert before he begins murdering people, and the only way to do that is burning him. Liv doesn't think it's fair and asks for a day to talk to Reinert, hoping he may be in control. If he isn't, then she'll agree to follow Sverre's plan. The doctor gives her 2 samples of blood so they can satisfy their hunger for now. In the meantime, Reinert is freaking out at his house because the effects of withdrawal are kicking in. At the same time, Judith is studying the family case and adds Reinert's situation to the evidence, so now she's suspicious too. The next morning, Liv makes a bunch of smoothies with the blood. A bit of the drink spills on the table, and Odd tries it only to think it tastes bad. However, he believes Liv when she says it's beets. Then she goes to Reinert's house, and since he won't answer the door, she goes inside on her own. The house is a mess, and Reinert looks sick. Liv offers the smoothie and tries to explain she went through the same thing, but Reinert ignores her and leaves. When Liv tries going after him, she isn't fast enough on her bicycle and loses sight of his car. She goes to the police station only to discover he isn't there. Judith takes the chance to ask her a few questions and gets more suspicious of Liv's awkwardness. Afterward, Liv starts searching the town and gets a call from Sverre, who reminds her to give Reinert the blood quickly if she doesn't want to be responsible for more deaths. At his office, Sverre keeps mixing Liv's and Reinert's blood in his own wounds. Meanwhile, Odd crosses the border and makes it to Sweden to pick up the body. However, at the morgue, they don't even open the door. They just tell him through the speaker to come back tonight because the body isn't ready yet. In the evening, another employee arrives and Odd is surprised by his very expensive car. The man explains he sells fancy caskets by telling the grieving families that's what the dead person chose before they passed. The conversation is interrupted when a morgue doctor announces the body's ready. Odd moves it into a casket and comments on how heavy it is for such a thin guy. He asks the doctor for some details about the death, but she says he's only supposed to drive and sends him off. On his way back, Odd gets too worried and stops the car to inspect the body. When he pokes into the autopsy wound, he discovers illegal happy powder hidden under the skin. A furious Odd immediately calls Martin, who mocks him for believing anyone would pay $30,000 for a normal body. Martin reminds Odd of his situation, and Odd is so desperate that he has no choice but to play along. Once he makes it to the border, he turns up the heat in the car to make the rotting stench worse. The cops see the paperwork is in order and assume the dogs are reacting to the smell of the dead body, so Odd is allowed to pass without issues. Moments later, he delivers the body to Martin, who immediately pays him the job in cash while his accomplice opens the body to confirm the powder is fine. Afterward, Odd feels so guilty that he hides in the bathroom of the gas station to clear his thoughts. He stays there for 2 hours, so an employee calls the police. When Judith comes to check on him, Odd tells her he's stressed over money issues. Judith points out he could sell the storage unit, and when Odd says he doesn't have one, she becomes even more suspicious of Liv. In town, Liv keeps searching for Reinert, but she starts feeling dizzy, so she has to drink most of the smoothie. She stops picking up Sverre's calls, so he goes out to search as well. At that moment, Reinert finally gives in to his hunger and starts chasing after a kid on the street. The child trips and falls, causing a bleeding wound that makes Reinert even crazier. Before he can attack, Sverre appears behind him and gives him an injection to put him to sleep, revealing he was the one who injected Liv too. By the time Liv's enhanced hearing takes her to the same spot, Sverre and Reinert are gone, and since there's blood on the ground, she assumes the worst. She immediately calls Sverre, who tells her he stopped Reinert and asks her to go to the old barn. Soon Liv arrives at the field, and Sverre gives her a blood bottle, explaining she must feed Reinert to keep him calm before they burn the building down. Liv enters the barn and finds an unconscious Reinert chained to the wall. Suddenly she hears a noise and discovers Sverre has locked the door with more chains, so he can kill them together. All the windows are blocked, but there's still enough space for Sverre to reach inside and return the necklace to Livy before lighting the building on fire. Liv climbs on a chair to reach a higher window, but it breaks and she falls. At that moment, she remembers the bottle, so she opens it in front of Reinert to wake him up with the smell. Then she steps back, causing Reinert to go crazy and break the chains and the wood he's tied to. Liv continues moving, and when he's about to attack her, she ducks, causing him to burst through the blocked window. Now Liv can come out too, and when Sverre notices, he tries running away. Liv chases him and furiously tackles him to the ground, so Sverre starts making up excuses. He says he knew Liv would come back from the fire and that he could give her blood to live a normal life. However, Liv is blind with fury and starts choking him, not stopping until he reminds her she's not a murderer. She cries at her own actions as she lets Sverre go, only for Reinert to show up and start choking Sverre too. Liv feeds him the blood from the bottle to stop him, but it's too late. Sverre is now dead, and now that Reinert has a clear mind, he starts crying as well. Afterward, the duo takes Sverre's body to the funerary home. Liv explains that the embalming equipment takes the body's blood out to replace it with chemicals, which means they can drain Sverre to have a good blood supply and burn the body later. The machine starts working, and Liv fills any jar she can find around. Once they're done, they put the body in the trunk of Reinert's police car. At the same time, Odd can't sleep because of his guilt, so he goes to the office and burns the money. At that moment, Liv comes in to look for the crematorium keys, but has to chat with her brother instead. Odd admits the bank is taking the house soon, and the only way to save it would be someone hiring an exceptional funeral. Liv hugs him and promises something will turn up. Outside, Judith finds Reinert in his car and gets in to tell him she's very close to solving the Arvid case. Suddenly, she smells the stench, but assumes Reinert farted and leaves. Then Liv comes back and announces they aren't burning Sverre because Odd needs a funeral. At first, Reinert refuses, but Liv reminds him he's a cop so he can manipulate the evidence. In the morning, Reinert goes to the police station as usual and hears Judith discuss the family case. Now she thinks that having suspected Liv's mother back in the day hadn't been wrong after all. The conversation is interrupted by a call from the hospital saying Sverre was found dead in his house. At the same time, Odd gets the same call, which puts him in a very happy mood. Minutes later, Odd arrives at the doctor's house to pick up the body, and Reinert says he died of natural causes. He points out Sverre was old, stressed from work, and drank a lot. Odd notices the body is still fresh, but believes the cop's conclusion. Afterward, Reinert reports to Judith that he didn't find anything weird, so an autopsy isn't needed. But Judith is still suspicious. At home, Live hides all the tapes and drinks Sverre's blood for breakfast. Reinert shows up to say he can't do this anymore, and Live comforts him, promising they'll work it out. When Reinert misreads the moment and tries to kiss her, she pulls away. Thinking she's just using him as an alibi, Reinert leaves. At the funeral house, Odd tells Sverre's sister how well he knew the doctor and points out all the expensive things Sverre liked. This convinces her to buy the fanciest casket and the best funeral service. After she leaves, Odd prepares the body while dancing to loud music to celebrate the great sale. Liv is glad to see Odd so happy, but she starts to worry when Odd notices that Sverre's body isn't stiff yet. He wonders if he should tell the police, but Liv points out that if they take the body back for an investigation, they won't get the funeral money in time, so Odd agrees to stay quiet. That night, Liv tries calling Reinert, but he won't pick up, so she leaves a message saying she does care about him. Odd is still haunted by his guilt and interrupts the embalming preparations to tell Rose the truth. In the morning, Liv is woken up by the sound of Odd and Rose arguing. Rose thinks Odd should take care of his family, but Odd is afraid of losing his license if he hides things from the cops. Hearing this, Liv runs out of the house. At the police station, Judith calls her boss to get authorization for an autopsy on Sverre. Her boss agrees and says that if she gets enough evidence from the autopsy, she can arrest Liv. At the same time, Liv shows up to drag Reinert to a private spot so they can discuss what to do. This escalates into an argument, and Liv calls Reinert a murderer, which hurts him and causes him to leave. Then Liv goes home and finds Odd and Rose making up. Feeling guilty, she shows her necklace to Odd and explains Sverre attacked her. She admits she was involved in his death only in self-defense, and never mentions her vampirism. Liv wants to confess her crime to the police to skip the autopsy and have the funeral. But before Odd can react, Judith shows up to apprehend Liv. Before leaving, she orders Odd to send the body to the morgue without hearing what he has to say. Liv is kept in a cell for a whole night. In the morning, Reinert comes to check on her, and Liv says Arvid had been right. Keeping vampires alive isn't worth it. Reinert says they should escape together to another city, but when they leave the cell, Judith finds them, so Reinert pretends he's interrogating Liv. At that moment, they get a call from the morgue informing them Sverre is already embalmed, so they can't do the autopsy. It seems Odd finished the job before delivering the body to protect his sister. Judith goes to yell at Odd, who pretends he did the job the other night as he originally intended, and points out Judith never let him explain. Liv overhears this from the window and cries, touched by her brother's gesture. Soon Liv is released and Sverre has an expensive funeral that saves Odd's business. The cops also attend the ceremony, and Judith still thinks everything is suspicious. After the funeral, the siblings go home, and Odd pretends everything is fine. However, he can't stop thinking about the moment he did the embalming, because he discovered Sverre's body was missing all the blood. Odd keeps staring at his sister, wondering what she's hiding.